Katie, did I get a message from you that you went to school with my brother?
Yeah, Stevie, when I were in the same class, the same graduating class. So I saw you come on. I was like, what?
So yeah, I was a senior when you were a freshman.
Yeah, yeah,
Go Cougars.
I guess.
Wow.
Yeah,
Where
they just asked me to join the Facebook group for my graduating class. And so it's wild. You got to be careful like going and looking at wow, like some real flashbacks there.
all righty. Well,
Yeah.
I guess we're derailing this presentation so far. We're 2 minutes
I'm great
behind
at that,
now.
I guess. Yeah.
No, it's good, but I don't know. Are we supposed to do any formal introductions here or anything?
Yes, if you like, yeah, you can have a kind of an introduction and then go to your presentation. Thank you. I give permission to Dr. Kelly Berry for sharing the any file that you want to share.
Just actually, I'm not a doctor yet. That'll be probably next year. So I just want to make sure. But thank you for that time.
And I actually have the videos if you could give me permission to share too.
I gave permission to Kelly, but I'm not sure.
I have permission, so Alex, you should be able to share.
Sounds good. So should we just introduce ourselves and get going?
Mm.
Yeah, I have the ability to share.
Okay.
You have the ability to share.
Yep, I'm good.
Perfect.
All right, so we can just introduce ourselves and start, right?
Yes.
All right. Well, Kelly, I'll let you start. Kelly did a lot of the legwork organizing this, so go for
Sure.
it, Kelly.
Sure. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Dr. Redcorn and I are excited about sharing our knowledge today. The Rural Education Summit asked us to provide a presentation on Indigenous teaching approaches and practices. So it was simple. It was easy to say yes because that's what we do. We're both Indigenous scholars, educators, and teachers. So my name is Kelly Berry. I'm a citizen of the Apache Tribe of Oklahoma with affiliations of the Kiowa, Cheyenne, and Choctaw Nations. I'm a second-year doctoral student in educational leadership at K-State, and I'm also the Indigenous Initiatives Research Associate at K-State, working alongside Dr. Alex Redcorn.
And glad to have Kelly with us. And so, yeah, my name is Alex Redcorn. I'm a citizen of the Osage Nation from Pawhuska, Oklahoma. My family's from the Oaxacaline district, which is Pawhuska, Oklahoma. For anybody that knows, we got any Okies in here? No, all right. So that's where my family's from. But at Kansas State, I'm an assistant professor of ed leadership, and I do a lot of work with Indigenous education and trying to build capacities for tribes to take on a more prominent role in the education of their people. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And one of the things that I want to make people aware of, so for people that jumped on, we're involved in a rural equity project right now that's sponsored with the Spencer Foundation, where we're basically trying to create a national agenda that's focused on how we can create more equitable spaces in rural education, and where equity work tends to be urban focused. And so we're putting the square focus on rurality and rural spaces. And I got pulled into rural education in the last couple of years because people started to realize there are a lot of indigenous spaces that are overlapping with rural education. However, well, for example, Dr. Webb was talking about Alaska Natives. There's a lot of rural communities and indigenous Alaska Native communities in rural Alaska. And so we're trying to bring attention to that. And the field of rural education is starting to confront that a little bit, and how there are rural spaces that are people of color and not a white Christian farmer stereotype. And so this this work is kind of culminating. Right now, we're working on a special issue. It's a collaboration between the Rural Educator and the Journal of American Indian Education, trying to bring more visibility to that overlap and get these fields of Indigenous ed and rural ed talking to one another a little bit more. So basically, I just wanted to say that these fields are kind of in a moment, and there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that may not be public facing yet, but it's something that you can keep an eye out for moving forward. There's some collaborations going across Indigenous ed and rural ed. So with that being said, we're going to start at the teacher level and really kind of start with the concept of what the stereotypes that we encounter in education. And Kelly, do you want to introduce our first video?
Sure. The first video is a colleague of ours. He's a teacher at a government boarding school in Oklahoma, teaching 40 years and has taught nothing but Native American students. So he was one of our colleagues we wanted to reach out because of his knowledge of his approaches to teaching Native students in the classroom. And just so everybody's on the same page, you'll hear Native American, Indigenous, Native American Indian. They all mean the same thing. So you'll hear those words interchangeably during their presentation.
I had to make sure I shared sound when I shared the clip. So can everybody see this? All righty, so let's go ahead and hear from some folks in the field.
Good evening. My name is Terry Ware. I'm a Kiowa Comanche tribe from Oklahoma. I'm a Native American and I'm a school teacher. Now, most people in this society view Native Americans or Indian people, that's what more people know us by, as this picture here, with a war bonnet on, with a war club in my hand, feathers all over, bright colors and those type of things, which is right to a certain extent, but this is our everyday look. More likely, you're going to find me less with this and then on weekends more like this. This is how I dress on the weekends and conduct myself and go around and do these kind of things. So you'll view Native Americans like this. But on a daily basis, this is more of who I am. Coach Ware is what they call me. I'm a school teacher. I teach class over here at Riverside Indian School in Anadarko, Oklahoma. I also coach cross country, track. I coach football and basketball in the past and such. And our goal today is to let you know different teaching techniques for teaching Indigenous students and show you some and talk to you about how I teach them and what goes into our day-to-day life and such, as far as Native American teachers going. I went to a teaching college here in Oklahoma, the University of Science and Arts of Oklahoma, and the University of Science and Arts, it's a teaching college, really, and then they have a lot of information there, and we've done a lot of work with teaching methodologies, classroom discipline, all these things that we go through on a daily basis, no matter who it is or what race our children are. No matter what age. I'm K-12 certified, so I can teach from kindergarten to 12th grade. And so that's been good for me because this last year, I'm teaching elementary kids. In the past, I've taught high school, mostly in the middle school and the 9th grade range, the biggest part of my career. But I was, I'm kind of glad I got moved down to the little kids because, we have a lot of fun. Now, our school is 100% Native American students. 100% of them, they come from all over the United States to go to school here and at Riverside. And we have all different abilities here, all the way from the smartest kids you can imagine to some that really struggle along, and we have to put them on IEPs and work with them and such, which is fine and such. Early in my career, I was fortunate enough to study one summer under Dr. Lord Elm, the late Dr. Lord Elm. He's an Onondaga tribe of upstate New York, and he done studies back in the 70s, 80s, and in the early 90s on Native American students all over the United States. He would travel around the United States. He would go to them and stay with them, teach at their schools, and his whole philosophy was to find out how they learned, what it was. His theory is that Native American students learn, he call it holistic learning, and they learn from whole to part. They see something in their mind, they imagine it, they can see the finished product. That's what we have to do, is show them where we're going and go back and teach to them in part. And which most of our most of our curriculum nowadays is all part to whole. You start out with chapter 1, section 1, 2, 3, 4, and then get to test at the end. Well, our kids don't learn that very well that way. But if you go down there and show them, this is what we're going to do. We got a skeleton here at the end. This is what we're going to put together. Oh, cool, it's a skeleton. And go back and start putting all the parts in there, and they'll learn it that way. But if you started out with the hand and the foot and the brain and start putting that skeleton together, they would struggle with it. They would have a hard time. There'll be some that would do it, but the majority of them wouldn't. And that was just old philosophy. And then thinking of that also is our people, our students can imagine things. They can see things in their mind that's not necessarily out there as far as something that is written down or something that is there's no books on it. There's no videos to learn these things. The beadwork, if you see my club here, you see the intricate beadwork on that. Each bead on this was put on there one at a time. Each feather was tied one at a time. Everything was put in there one bead at a time, and it takes hours to do these kind of things. But whoever done this, they could see the finished product, and you'll see that these are feathers right here on this. You can see the little feathers on there. And somebody could see the feathers, and they went through them and put it together. That's not written down in books and stuff. The people that done these they could see these before they're finished. I brought some other medallions and beadwork, and this is the process of learning. They were taught by, you'll see this piece of beadwork, the geometric design, everything's going in the right direction. The colors all match. And this was beaded by a young lady who could see this in her mind, and she could do that, but there's no writing it down. There's no charts or anything. Another necklace like that, pretty much the same. Beat it and everything put together on it. And these are all pulled apart. They can see what they're doing here. They have that, and they go back and put it together. And the final one I have is this tie I have. This is just a necktie. You put it on and wear it and such, but you can see how much work has gone into that as far as the beadwork goes, the designs and stuff. Basically, what I'm telling you is that whenever you teach these students, understand how they see things, how they were taught. Our classes, they're not, I mean, our history, our family trees, they're all told verbally. There's nothing written down or any of these like this. Everything is verbally. That's how we learn. That's how we go through, and that's how the kids do it. Same way. They can see these designs. They learn from whole to part. And then if you show them the final product, they'll be able to do that. They'll be able to learn that. So when a kid comes in your class, if you happen to have a Native American student and they come in there, they don't seem to be picking up, you might try a different philosophy of working with them. You might try a different direction with them, with these students, and start saying, hey, this is the end product. This is what we're going to do. And they'll pick it up and they'll work at it a lot harder than what you think. Most of our children, myself included, everybody that grew up that way, we're all taught respect your elders and stuff. It's disrespectful to look at your elders in the eyes when they're talking to you. That's why a lot of kids put their heads down and look down, but that's where they were raised and such. You know, you don't disrespect your elders like that and look away from them like that. So they're taught, you know, not to interrupt, to listen. You know, they'll learn more by listening to you lecture than they will if you ask. You know, they won't ask a lot of questions, but they'll go through and they'll listen to a lot of what you say. So I hope this helps you understand how our Native American students learn and what direction you go. It's, you know, holistic learning. Dr. Lord Elm, you might read up on him. You know, he was somebody I've been teaching 34 years, and I've stuck to his methodology, and it's worked for me all these years and such. And, you know, maybe you'll have some good luck with it and help to understand your students, no matter not only Native American students, but any indigenous students like this. I hope you have a good evening. And if there's anything else, you can always reach me at Riverside Indian School, Anadarko, Oklahoma. Email me anytime. Thank you.
All right. Any quick gut reactions from the video? Thoughts?
I thought it was great. His pride for his school was fantastic, but I'm glad you posted in the comment board, because I was instantly confused of like, is this a boarding school, and how that worked, or how that, so a question is, so who how do students elect to go to this school, or and who pays for that? Does their own, organization, where they're in their own state, or how does that work?
I can speak to that. Actually, Terry was my colleague. I taught at Riverside for 2 years before I moved on to Kansas State. But it's an orbit school, which means that any Native American student who's eligible, who's enrolled in a federally recognized tribe, can go there. There's 4 schools that they kind of choose from, one in Oklahoma, one in Oregon, I think one in California, but they can choose whatever one they go to. As long as they're eligible to get in, it's free. It's free because the government, from the treaties, said we'll provide education for the students and for Native students, so it's free. They get 3 squares a day, which a lot of the kids come from reservations. They come from these reservations that they $5 is a lot of money to them. So they get 3 squares a day, and that's something they don't get back at home on the reservation. So we take care of them, we feed them, we clothe them, anything they need to make sure that we move them up the education ladder. So we've heard stories about boarding schools in the past. It's nothing like that today. It's more about preserving the culture and teaching culture to our students.
Yeah, and there's a system, like a lot of people are unfamiliar with like federal boarding schools and why do Indians have these special schools for them. But it goes back to treaties were signed, and when the federal government signed those treaties, they acknowledged that these are sovereign nations. And when they signed those treaties, in exchange for the land that they were forced to cede, they said, we'll provide you education, we'll provide you health programs, we'll provide you these things because we're uprooting you from your community and making you move somewhere else. And so those treaty rights are still in place today under what's usually referred to as the federal trust responsibility. So there's a network of over, I think it's 140 schools, the Bureau of Indian Education. Those are still in existence. Their original intent was to assimilate and destroy culture, but over time, the purpose has changed and been flipped. And so it really depends on what community you're in. There are more BIE schools, BIE, Bureau of Indian Education schools in different communities. It kind of just depends on where you're at. The Southwest tends to have a lot more too. Oh, and Katie, yeah, you're in Lawrence. Haskell Indian Nations University right there is a BIE institution. Any other questions or comments before we shift to the next video?
Actually, Alex, I'll tell that story real quick if you don't mind. So you saw Coach Ware with the war bonnet on, and that's a lot of society sees Native Americans still as wearing war bonnets and dressing in what's called breechcloths. That's what they believe that we still dress as. A few years ago, I was a guest lecturing at a small rural town in Texas, high school, social studies class. And they asked me down to talk about the Native culture. Well, I gave my spiel, and then I asked for questions. And one of the students raised his hand and said, Mr. Berry, is it true, because we were told this, is it true that you still live in teepees? Which kind of caught me off guard, because I didn't know how to answer that, because I have never been asked that before. So I corrected him. I said, no, sir, we don't live in teepees anymore. We did in the past, but not now. Kind of wish I did, because I wouldn't have to pay mortgage or rent anymore, but that's a different story. But I got curious. I said, where did you hear that information? Because I was thinking he might say a magazine or one of those old Western TV shows. And he raised his hand and he pointed at the teacher, directly at the teacher. And I looked over at the teacher and she had her head down. She didn't want to look at me. I said, well, maybe she misspoke about this information. Maybe it was a one-off. I'll let it go. So I asked any more questions, and another student raised his hand. Mr. Berry, we were told that you can talk to animals. It still caught me off guard again. And I kind of knew where the information came from, but I didn't want to look at her. I looked out of the corner of my eye and I saw the teacher put her head down again. And I said, sir, can you tell me where you heard that information? And half the class pointed directly at the teacher. So what I advise teachers and administrators to do, I encourage them to make sure you're teaching the truth in the classrooms. If you're teaching about culture, don't falsify the instruction, because it does a disservice to not only the students, but to your your position, and also to the culture. So I always encourage people to reach out to those tribes and ask us to help out with the voice in the curriculum or instruction.
Yeah, and to that, and with that story, I put 3 links in the chat. And so the first one is a national study on social studies standards, and basically found that 87% of all social studies standards about American Indians are situated in a pre-1900 context. So basically, by design, all people learn are Indians are stuck in the past. They're not people of the present. The other one is focused on sovereignty in the curriculum, and basically found that there's a whole lot of states that really don't teach about tribal sovereignty, and so people don't graduate from our schools understanding what tribal sovereignty is. People learn about state, federal, and local governments. They don't learn about tribal governments. And so even though tribal governments are in our communities, making sovereignty part of the conversation when you're talking about local, state, and federal governments is a really important kind of move, or a slight adaptation that we can make in our teaching, in our curriculum. And the last one is the National Council for the Social Studies state position statement about these things. And so, oh, if that's a K-State login, okay. So the second one's, I'll put the title of it during the next one. I'll put the title of it so you can search it in your own system. But I think we're going to move to the next one. So if you have any thoughts or questions or reflections, just feel free to put them in the chat. Oh, I didn't share the audio again. Need to do it again. All right. Next video. Is everybody ready? Oh, hold on. It'll make me, because I changed it, it made me.
That out of the way. Deputy Judge, this is Cornell P.V. I'm speaking to you in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and I'd like to respond to some inquiry that Kelly Berry gave to me about what educators need to know about teaching Indigenous Native students, effective teaching methods. I think there's no cookbook to trying to teach effectively with Native children. I think that over time you'll have to become very competent in your own ability to really transpire the teaching and learning. I think the best thing to do is to meet the student halfway, which means that to understand their learning modalities, and then for the teacher or the educator, whatever their way of conveying that education, at least meet the children, the students halfway. That way you have a better understanding of communicating. I think number one, that there's a legal framework out of the United States Constitution, which provides the government and the states to provide adequate financing of Indian education. And it comes in the realm of the Bureau of Indian Affairs programs through the today's boarding schools, and then for the state, we call federal programs, soft monies, mainly out of Title VI, was this Indian Education, Johnson O'Malley, and Impact Aid. Those are the main funding formulas that come from a legal framework. But not just to advance that, TEDNA is the Tribal Education Directors National Assembly, is a organization that works in the spirit of consultation to make sure that those that receive funds from the state and the federal engage into the dialogue of making sure the local educational association or the agency, the school district, is doing what they say they're doing in a good way. And that's kind of the framework for the legal framework. But if you know Indian education, Indian country, you know, because of colonization, we've been interrupted with the United States government's introduction of boarding schools, and that has been a damage to the soul bone and to this generation of native students. And so anybody that goes into Indian country has to look through a lens of not a damage-centered research, but also look at asset-based research and look at the strengths perspective from those populations, knowing that they need time to heal and because they're hurting from intergenerational grief. And I know that in education, there's a knowledge base that has been gained over time through local evidence base and national research that looks at effective ways to teach and frame from, I think, knowledge from the elders, and then to use that, integrate that into strategic plans in the district level, and also integrate those into lesson plans at the basic level. That's basically the framework that I don't want to introduce. And I'll stop right there because we could go into more pedagogical solutions and strategies, but to give time to Cindy to speak. So I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Cindy Fumero. Hello, my name is Cindy Fumero. I am a citizen of the Comanche Nation, also of Oglala Sioux descent. But I'm a number of things. I'm every Native person that I've ever been in ceremony with. And what I consider, what you would need to know is to know that you don't know, right? And to learn the things that you come across with a true understanding and a want and a need and a desire to help the inner child of that person. You have a body, but you also have a spirit in an indigenous child. And that spirit has been colonialized and hidden. It's hidden deep within. I think that, I have 7 children of my own, and coming from California, we were no different than the Hispanic, Latino, Samoan, Asian populations. Here I come from Lawton, Oklahoma. We are Comanche citizens, and we like to be treated in a respectful way. My children are not necessarily treated in that respect, though. My children are student athletes. When they were first came from California, they were held back. That's, and I was still in the mindset of they know what they're talking about, and I don't, and sure. So, and they further than that, they wanted to put them all on individual education plans. And when I started talking to Dr. Peavywardy about some of the things that were happening, he began to tell me all of these things about why you fill out those forms where it tells you how you're numbered as a student, being homeless, being indigenous, being on tribal land, being part of a tribal government. Do you live on tribal land? Are you a farm worker? Those kinds of things are for the money, the value that is placed on the child. So when they have an IEP, of course, those also activate funds from the federal government. Well, I chose not to do that. And I was taking a big risk, but I know that without great risk, there's not great reward. Today, those children are A and B students. They're not numbered, they're not labeled, they're not categorized, other than that they're student athletes. They still get discriminated against. My daughter was put on the ineligible list, even though she had an A and B. She has a 3.5 GPA. Why is that? Well, because they just expected that. And that's, they don't have a lot of Native athletes, even in wrestling, even though we're in a Native community. So where are those children? So I would say that Cornell's absolutely right, that you meet the child. I would go further. Halfway is not enough. I think that in order to really change the trajectory of a population that's been discriminated against all of the last 500 years, that you need to go beyond that. And in doing so, you unlearn how you've been taught to reach out to them. We learn in different ways. You know, we learn by place-based evidence practice. We learn by what our elders taught us. We're oral people. We're not written people. And so for us to write English and for us to learn math is difficult for us. It's not that we're less than, it's just the fact that we are not taught in the way that we learn. And so it has been, and because we've been assimilated, now I'm a problem. I'm a problem child. I'm not, I grew up believing that. I grew up believing that I was not worthy, that I was invalid. And this was in Oklahoma. So I'm sure it's not much different than the other parts of the world when it comes around Indigenous children. So I would just say to keep going, try to unlearn some of the things that you've learned. Try to meet that child beyond halfway. By unlearning that stuff, you are meeting them more than halfway. And if you just do that for one Native child and they get to a different spot, you know, we're really good at STEM practices. When we started believing in that, our children began to get, you know, in certain programs that they wouldn't necessarily have been in. Now there's more women in the engineering field at the local university here at Cameron than that I knew. I'm the president of the Native American Student Association, and there's more women, Indigenous women at the engineering program here at Cameron than there were 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And so those are the things, because we began to understand and take back our education. I would say that that would be important to help them learn, show them things that provide proof that they're valid, books, videos, cultural practices, you know, ask them, they're the experts. They're the experts. If they don't know, find a way. Your idea is to teach. And that's what we are experiencing, a great turnover in the way things are being taught, because we're taking it back. We're taking our education back. And so thank you for allowing me to speak and share on that.
So we're running short on time for our last video, but I wanted to make sure that people get a chance to kind of debrief in some way. And so if you have any thoughts or questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. And I just want to contextualize something that she said is that Native students, when they have an opportunity, when they say take it back, like we have to understand that education was happening in American Indian societies long before Europeans ever showed up. And so they were able to build their own educational systems for their own communities. They were like the OGs of place-based education, if we think about it that way, right? And so when she's talking about taking it back, there was this interruption where the federal government decided this is how education needs to work for Native communities. And there's this been slow kind of taking it back over time, where tribal governments are getting more involved in the education of their people. And so just some contextualization there. And Kelly, do you have anything you want to add before I transition to this next video?
Yeah, if you're around the Kansas, Lawrence area, Dr. Peavy is speaking. Was it tomorrow, Alex?
Tonight. He's actually speaking tonight. So 4:30 or 5 tonight.
He actually serves as Dr. Redcorn's and as a mentor. That's where we started at, and he's really helped us decolonize not only the curriculums, but ourselves too as an instructor.
Agreed. He's the only Native person I've ever had involved in the actual systems of education of where I was supposed to learn. And he was a professor of mine at KU. I'm at K-State now, but he was a professor of mine at KU, and it's incredible what happens when you have one Native professor, teacher in your whole string of kindergarten to the doctorate. Is a life changer for me, and Kelly too, in that way. So okay, so we got to transition to this last one, and I want to contextualize it. But please put your thoughts, reflections, or questions that you have in the chat as we go. So Kenny St. Pierre I'm going to have to reshare because every time I switch windows, it changes. Kenny St. Pierre is the Native American Student Services Coordinator at Lawrence Public Schools. He's also a student of ours in the Indigenous Educational Leadership Graduate Certificate Program. It's a new program at K-State. And basically, okay, I gotta get this video up. What is important to hear from Kenny is Lawrence is an urban context. And 93% of American Indian kids are actually in our mainstream public schools. And due to urban relocation in the 50s and 60s, there's a whole subfield of urban Indians, all right? And there's movement between urban and rural spaces between these families. And so for a lot of existence for American Indian people, there's just constant movement between urban and rural spaces. For example, I grew up in the Kansas City area, yet my home community is in rural Oklahoma. All right. And so that movement is part of our lived existence. And so Kenny is giving context about how he works with students in an urban context, but these students are also moving to rural spaces. But yeah. Kelly, anything you want to add?
No, you're good. You touched upon everything.
All right. Hopefully I remembered to hit the share sound. So let me know real quick if it's not.
Hello, my name is Kenneth St. Pierre, enrolled member of the Yankton tribe. Indigenous teaching techniques or what educators should know when teaching Indigenous students. For me, when I think about that question, I think about respect. And I think for me, respect has a lot of layers to that. And I think for the respect for me is also building a relationship. For me, respect and relationship go hand in hand. And when I introduce myself to my class or Indigenous students, I don't like to put a title like a teacher title. I'm just Kenny St. Pierre. I know that I'm a teacher, but then I also just want to bring it down like a non-authoritarian approach. And I just tell them about who I am, where I came from, what I went through. And that's my first layer of respect. So in my experience, I've used that approach, and you can kind of see the students' nervous level, nervous energy. Almost, it doesn't subside totally, but it's not as heightened as when they walk into the schoolroom or the classroom. So relationships for me, building relationships help me guide. It helps me guide the students through the education process, whether they're a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. I just try to meet them where they're at in their academic career, and I just give them advice. So when I introduce myself and I tell them who I am, where I'm from, I also just like to tell them, like, think of me as like an uncle in the classroom. Try not to go too deep with that, but it's just, think of me, if you have a respectable uncle, that's who I am in the classroom. And it just doesn't end in the classroom. I'll see the students outside of the classroom, whether that be the lunchroom, in the gym, or another class. I want them to carry that respect aspect into the other classroom and around the school, as much as they do in the classroom. So I also ask them what works for them, what works best for them. When I think of it as a coaching style. So coaching and teaching for me goes hand in hand. I'm not going to, if I have a group of students that are not very big, I'm not going to run like a power football formation. I'm going to adapt my needs to the students that I have in the classroom. And that's kind of like the approach I take in the classroom as well. We're not going to know everything at first, but I think the idea is to get them feeling comfortable with who you are in the classroom. Lay those classroom expectations down, just like just like we're going through life. It's not going to be good. It's not going to be the best. You're going to have your ups and downs. But I think the consistency, that you show to your Indigenous students is key. And I feel like it's crucial because just as much as you are observing them, they're observing you as well. And it could be the littlest things of how you talk to them, how you may approach them. You have to look for those nonverbal cues. And you can say that's hard. And people might say it's hard, but I think you need to pay attention to that. And I think for me, growing up with my grandma, she always told me to watch and observe people. For me, that's crucial advice. I use it to this day, and it's helped me out in my life. So I just tell them that story because I was that annoying kid that used to ask a ton of questions. My grandma would just tell me to, be quiet and, just observe people. And so we learn through storytelling. Indigenous people learn through storytelling. And I think that's another key component is to.
I'm going to go ahead and stop Kenny a little bit early so we have time for people to ask questions or comments. And just to reinforce some stuff I put in the chat, people often think of American Indian culture as like powwows, drums, feathers, but like if you pay attention to what's happening around those drums and around those ceremonies and things like that, there's a whole lot of relationships, respect, and giving respect, receiving respect, honoring people, commending people, acknowledging people. And that's usually stuff that people don't quite recognize. And so bringing that concept of respect and relationships and that reciprocity into the classroom is a really important layer. And as he was talking about, you will very often see people when an elder starts talking, people just look down and listen. Because you're supposed to observe, listen, observe, listen, observe, listen, observe, listen. And we go through ceremonies our entire lives observing and listening, observing and listening. And things don't always click until you're 29 years old in the same ceremony. You see something and you're noticing something totally deeper, newer, a new revelation because of your maturity. So Kelly, I don't know if you want to add to that or if anybody wants to comment on that, but just something that I wanted to kind of draw a connection for people.
Sure. I was raised traditional around the drum, but I always have heard that people have asked me, Kelly, you gonna play your tom-toms this weekend? That's the lack of respect that people have for the culture. So I've heard it all, the stereotypical, do you drink beer? Are you an alcoholic, Kelly? I've heard it recently, heard it when I was growing up, but I just encourage people just to respect other cultures, as Kenny was talking about.
Does anybody have any reflections or questions as we've thrown a lot of ideas and layers of thought at you? I'm not afraid of wait time.
Thank you. I think the time is over right now, and thank you for your nice presentation and talk. Really appreciate it.
I would
definitely like to continue this conversation, beyond this. So maybe if we could stay in contact and.
Yeah, for sure. And so I'll put my email and Kelly, you can put your email in there. Feel free to reach out anytime. We've only scratched the surface of some of this, and there's a lot of substantive literature out there that really goes a lot deeper. And this is kind of that like Indian Education 101 starting points to several conversations. And so just let us know, and we'd love to follow up and help out in any way we can.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.